And just to summarize for anyone who's just beginning this recording, we just started recording. We read a statement about, what has gone on that is identical to the statement in the prior interview, which was recorded. So you can go see it there if you want to. And now we'll go on to the questions part of this interview. So before I go on to that, though, I wonder, Laird, do you feel like you have enough information? You want to ask any clarifying questions about that synopsis?
You have currently a group, this job it is to help people through tension if they don't find their way through it on their own?
We have a mediation guild.
Okay. And so were they bypassed in these dynamics, or did they make an attempt to navigate them and just didn't work, or what?
Katie or Abraham, both of whom are members of the mediation guild, would one of you briefly explain how the mediation guild was engaged or not?
Sure. We do have a mediation guild. There were a couple of factors, among them that we have to have all parties concerned consent to having a mediation. And if they do not, if one party or both parties do not consent to a mediation, we don't really have a way to compel them to engage in that process. And there's also been discussion that mediation is perhaps transactional in part in its nature, and that maybe isn't the best platform when people feel that racial discrimination or prejudice is one of the ingredients in the conflict. So it's difficult with the combination.
So there's two parts there. One of them is you didn't have everybody's permission to get active, so that sort of stopped you. And then the other piece is when that group has been impaneled, its mandate didn't include working with diversity issues. Is that the other piece you're saying?
Well, I think if both parties consented to us working with them, we could attempt to tackle diversity issues as well. Okay. But that was one of the reasons why I think my understanding is the consent wasn't there.
All right. Okay. Meaning that at least one party in it felt that there may not be sufficient sensitivity to diversity issues for this group to manage the conflict.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you. Got it.
Thank you.
All right.
Any other clarifying questions, Laird?
So did you you did whatever you did at home, and it didn't necessarily include the mediation guild, whose job was most closely set up to do that, but that wasn't accessible. I have comments about that, but let's leave that aside for now. Let's what else has been tried short of what we're doing now?
Full community dialogue.
Okay. All right. And any healing come from that?
Might have made it worse.
Oh.
These were pretty difficult conversations that did not.
No, I buy that it's difficult. I get that. And did you internally facilitate it?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is part of the reason why we're looking for an outside facilitator now.
I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
We did also briefly engage external facilitator to lead us in a discussion, and we tried some small group communication, but it wasn't very targeted. It was very general, trying to get people to the table and views expressed, and it didn't seem to have a beneficial effect.
There wasn't. I mean, one of the things that would be in my mind, there wasn't a greater, as a result of that attempt, there didn't seem to be a greater sense of understanding other players' point of view. Would you say that's fair?
I would agree with that. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. One more procedural question. Laird, how much time do you have available for us for this interview?
I have a commitment at 6 o'clock your time.
Okay, great. You could You can interview with us for 5 hours.
I'm pretty tough. You can. I don't know if I've ever actually seen a group that can outwork me, but you could try.
Okay, all right. Well then, here we go. I'm gonna look over here at my copy. Okay, so I know you received a copy of these questions. I'm gonna probably not ask them in the exact order you got them.
Doesn't matter.
Our situation includes lots of different definitions of the problem.
Yeah.
How would you approach this so our healing isn't without clear targets?
Well, my inclination, and this is, I mean, I've been in this field of working with intentional communities and you know, brought in as an outside person to help with tension for over 35 years now. So I've been around the block, okay, and in fact, and some of that was Sunward, but that's, you know, I mean, I've done a lot of stuff, and what I've come to as the most effective way for my time to be used is to start by having as many conversations with individuals or couples, if they prefer, as possible, as are willing, with me, to get each person's sense of what's the problem, you know, what's your saying. I listen, essentially, and what do you think is a good outcome? What are you looking for? I am less concerned with determining what actually happened as what the gap is between the perceptions of it. And then it doesn't really matter to me so much what happened in the past, is what can we agree that we would prefer to happen in the future? And what can we do to increase awareness of how that perspective that's different for the players leads to their actions making sense, so that there's some rapport and you can understand why that reaction happened. And, you know, you can disagree about the story, but it's like, that's not the key thing. The key thing is you've got a broken pipe in communication and the relationships are damaged. And it makes it really hard to solve problems. Trust is eroded and stuff. And so I start by just listening until, and I do it for two reasons. One is to see the breadth of the stories, how big the gaps are, you know, where there is agreement and where there isn't. And I expect there to be disagreement. I mean, that's just normal. But, I mean, sometimes there's not, but that's almost always an element. And then it's also to establish to each player's satisfaction, if I can, that I can hear them, so that I can be their ally in their story being on the table. I mean, I'm not taking sides. I do the same thing with everybody. And I make it clear that I'm having these conversations with as broad a range of people as possible. And then from that, I'll develop a summary. I'll call it findings or something like that, and which is not attributing this person said that. It's more like everybody agrees with this. There's disagreement about this other thing. Most people think this happened, but some people don't think that. I can kind of paint the broad strokes and then make a suggestion for how to proceed based on how big is the gap, how bad is the hurt. And I don't like to decide what I want to do until I get the lay of the land and get a sense of where everybody's at and whether or not they feel comfortable working with me. And so I have to establish that. Now, some of you I know, you know, Suzanne, Nancy, Rowena, at least. And there's Jim. I see there's an old face for me. I can say that because I'm old too. Anyway, but for some of you, I'm new, I guess, because it's been a while since I've been at Sunward. And plus, you know, the people, I don't know who the people are. I don't need to know at this point. But if I were hired, that's the way I would start. And then that way, once we get to the place of working as a whole group, we could hit the ground running. I mean, I would send my summary out to the whole group and the recommendations for what we would do. And then if people can buy that, okay, that sounds like a reasonable summary, you know, which includes, you don't agree here, you do agree here, that kind of thing. There's a lot of hurt here, that kind of thing. And then we can get right to it. Yeah. That's generally how I do it.
Yeah. And just for clarity, I'm guessing that you would do maybe some of these interviews with people, the pre-talking, maybe by Zoom, and then.
Well, I can't. Yeah. I mean, you know, I used to always work only in person. And then in March 2020, that changed all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I was dead in the water and didn't know what was going to happen. Then I reinvented myself on Zoom to where all of my work was on Zoom. And I found, to my surprise, it worked better than I thought it might. And so I'm able to still function in very challenging and sensitive areas through that medium. That doesn't mean the people who are in the mix are comfortable talking with me on Zoom, but I am. Now, my understanding is you're looking for somebody who can come to Ann Arbor,
Yes.
which is fine. I'm actually
Part of
able
the whole
to
group
do that.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. So now we could be talking about a number of people. How many? What's the adult population of the? Well, and also maybe late teens too. I'm not talking about 8-year-olds, but if you got 18-year-olds or 15-year-olds, maybe I need to talk to them too. So how many people are we talking? Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to talk to me, but how many are we? How many people is that add up to?
When I personally guesstimate Sunward's population, I usually say it's between 70 and 100.
All right, that's a lot. Okay, so
I mean, and not all of those people probably feel closely involved.
Sure.
Center. So I might guess that, I'm not sure. I'm going to just make a wild guess. And if anybody wants to put a different number into the chat, I would guess you'd be wanting to talk to 15 to 20 people.
Okay.
Maybe less.
Well, I'll let them self-select, basically. Well, I'll put out the same invitation to anybody that would like to have a conversation with me about how they see what's going on and what they would like me to know and what they think is a good objective, a constructive objective for my time with the community.
Mhm.
And then I could do all of these by Zoom ahead if the person was comfortable, or by phone, or I can do some of them on site. But it seems like, I mean, it's going to take a little while to go through that. I mean, I can go through it pretty quick, set aside the time, and I've done it both ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I'm going to look at another question here. We have a diversity of opinions and factions. Would you consider, I think the wording of this question might be a little off. I'm just going to read it as written and then we'll mull it out. Would you consider deciding about what to address as a step in this process and how that step might work? Can you pull anything out of that? We're talking about diversity of opinions and factions.
Well, I'm imagining one of the elements here that there's a sense of stuckness for some, and at least that's the sense I have, and that wouldn't be surprising. And so I need to establish with as many people as possible before we even start working with the whole group that I can hear what their story is and how they see it.
Yeah.
And that I'm not trying to decide or lead a tribunal that determines who's actually right. I don't think that's constructive. I just want to describe the gap, and so people need to feel like, okay, I can trust Laird to be my ally in being heard.
Yep. Okay, we have another question. An important thing for us is to get buy-in and participation, not just in numbers of people, but also in diversity of opinions. Is that a challenge you can take on? And I think you just answered that. Basically.
Well, sure. I mean, I'm an older white guy, so it's like you're a person of color who feels like there's a racism going on in the community. There's going to be some suspicion about like, how is the deck stacked here, and what is the ability capacity of this person to work with people of color? It's got to be in play. And so I'm hoping I'll get a chance. But
have you ever found yourself in a situation with a community where race was a significant issue and you were the designated facilitator? And how did you work with being an older white guy in that situation, and how did it go?
Well, it's only a little bit. Now, there's partly because most of my work has been in intentional communities, and as you are aware, I'm sure most intentional communities tend to be white. Mm-hmm. There are people of color, and I know some, but it's a minority, and I mean, it's less than the percentage of the population is what I mean. It's underrepresented. And however, I've been working, this is a significant area for me professionally. I'm part of an anti-racism group that's been meeting for 5 years, and we read books and talk about personal experiences. I'm not leading it. I'm a member of it. I mean, it's the self-led where we do exploration around what is it where, what ways are we aware or not aware of privilege, and how does it enter the system? but I want to frame this in a wider context. To me, diversity is actually a huge field. There are the parts that mostly people focus on, which is like color. It could be sexual orientation. It could be religion. It can be gender. All those things, and they're the things that often they're the subject of fair housing laws, that kind of thing. But diversity is actually more subtle. Also, I mean, it comes in slow thinkers and fast thinkers, and introverts and extroverts. People who love talking in front of the whole group, like give me the mic. And other people, it's, they'd rather have root canal surgery without anesthesia than talk in front of the whole group. And it's like we don't think about those things a lot of times, and how meetings are set up by the people who are the originators, and they do it a way that's comfortable for them, not with the intention of slanting things. They just do it in the way that's comfortable, and they don't think about how, people are different. And so my job as a professional facilitator very often is to try to be sensitive to how engagements work for some people and not others. And some of that work has included black and white, as part of the field. And I think, though, that however, it's not fair to just equate introvert and extrovert with a person of color and a white person, as there's extra dynamics going on there. And I have had experience with that. And what I try to do is try to learn, okay, what do you need to feel safe? What is it that that kind of thing, and see whether, to the extent that I'm fairly flexible, I can do a lot of different things. And often that means I try to make the environment more comfortable for the speaker, and then I change what I do when somebody else is speaking to what's comfortable for them. So everybody feels like they've got an ally when they're talking, and will stay with it until they feel heard before going in. It's just not just assume that if you've had time at the mic, everybody gets what you said, because I think there'll be a fair amount of distrust. So I have to go fairly deliberately, especially at the beginning. It was kind of a rambling answer, but
what else can you do sometimes? Thank you.
Right. Sure.
Okay. So what format do you feel comfortable with or feel would work well for our community and situation, including types of sessions and timing?
Well, I can, I made a glib statement at the beginning of this interview of how you're not going to outwork me. So, I mean, it's whatever the community's willing to put into it, I'll answer the bell. And so it's kind of, I imagine we're talking about a weekend that it's about impossible to really carve out significant time during the week, except maybe in the evening or something. But it makes sense to work intensively to me, because I can stay on top of it, and we can move along and build, from one session to the other. Is what you're willing to set aside for this. Now, we don't, in terms of if you buy my interview strategy, that doesn't have to be done in a rush. I mean, I could accomplish most or all of that off-site, and then prepare a summary, and that could be done before I even get there. And then what I was thinking about how to start, kind of thing, and what I've digested from what everybody said. I mean, what often happens is, and I don't know enough about everything that's been tried in your group right now, but it isn't unusual that when I arrive in a group that's bringing me in, I will have done something that nobody else in the group has done, which is talk to everybody. I mean, there's oftentimes people talking with some people, but not everybody. And so now that depends. They have to be willing to talk with me. I mean, if they think, oh, this is hopeless, I give up, then I can't make them talk. But I certainly do my best to be even-handed and present with and hearing everybody in a way that makes them feel comfortable. So that's my job, the way I see it. Now I'm usually if we're thinking in terms of, say, 3-hour sessions, I think about it's inhumane to ask people to sit longer than 90 minutes at a time. So like with a 10-minute break in the middle, and then usually after 3 hours, people need an hour to go walking or eat something or take a nap or something like that. So I mean, you want to. It's not like an encounter session where it's nonstop and nobody sleeps. It just, but usually if the group wants to meet, I'll be there for you.
Okay,
I don't know I hope that answers the question.
that's fine. Have you ever worked with a group where follow-up sessions were involved?
Oh
Possibly,
yeah, sure.
or in
Yeah,
person?
it's not a majority of my work. Usually it's I get brought in for one intensive weekend or something like that, or sometimes just one meeting. But it's there are times, and this has been very satisfying for me, where it's actually a series of meetings, maybe 3 or 4 over a couple of years, where we don't have to try to hit a home run in one weekend. We get started and we have a plan, and that evolves as we go. We get the work done we can, and it takes a while. I mean, it can be tiring work. I mean, getting in here and working these things at a deep level, and so sometimes it makes sense to digest it and then come back next month or every 3 months later and pick up where we left off. And I've done that too. And then we find out where have you turned a corner, or where do we need to go back and do it again because it didn't stick. I mean, we're back in the mud again, and both happened. So it's hard to predict when I'm in it. I mean, I can tell that we've moved things along in the moment, but that doesn't mean it'll stay there. Or sometimes it rubber bands back, and both things occur.
Okay. Let's see. I've got a question here. What timeline might work for this kind of project with our community? And I think we just addressed that. So I'm skipping on. Oh, and we've got one. What is your experience addressing issues of diversity? I brought that up earlier as a follow-up question. So moving on. What is your experience working with co-housing communities similar to ours, or actually ours? Because there are a few people here who haven't met you yet. So you just.
I've worked with about 100 co-housing groups. I'm not sure there's anybody alive who's done more process work with co-housing groups than me. There might be, but I don't know them.
Okay, question answered. How would you teach us to deal with harm in the moment as it happens?
Well, my approach has been, and some of you have had a taste of this, but it would be something you'll see if I'm brought in, is I work both with ideas and energy. And I think they both need to be recognized and integrated in the work. So there's explicit room for both. And I'll demonstrate that, what that means. I mean, maybe just be a concept and you're wondering what the hell is he talking about. And it may make sense to, in fact, I would suggest setting aside time at the front end and at the back end to meet with you used to have what was called a facilitation guild. And is that still, do you have that concept still? Okay.
Yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense for me to meet with them both in the beginning and at the end to hear from you, like what things you need help with, or what is hard for you, and how can I be, help you be more what the community needs, and what that kind of thing. And then ask questions about what maybe I make choices. You think, what the hell were you doing there? And I can explain it there in a way. I'm happy to explain what I'm doing at any time to the entire group, but rather than have it be a workshop, I'm there to work an issue mainly. But I think actually taking time to get into the details of the choices I made with your facilitators might pay big dividends.
Okay. Do you ever work with whole groups to kind of train a relational process around emerging immediate harm?
Sure. I mean, what I'm hoping to establish in the front end would be a willingness to let me guide you into working the dynamic. And then to the extent that that's successful, we could spend some time usefully sort of riding that wave. And it's like, what did I do? What just happened here? And how could we replicate that when I go home? It's an important question. I mean, in a generic sense, not that next time that issue comes up, but the next time tensions surface and we can get a better result. I mean, I can tell you right now that I think one thing I would recommend based on the exchange I had with Abraham is I favor having an agreement in the community where that the group that the whatever they're called, the mediation group or whatever, is authorized to step in if there's something leaking in the community on, like, it's getting in the way. It's not, people can't sit at the same table together. They can't serve on committees together. You know, you give people a reasonable chance to work through things directly. Great, if that were, and sometimes that works. But where it doesn't, and it's starting to get, is I call it leaking on the rest of the community, they have the authorization to step in and not to decide who's right and wrong, but to make an attempt to repair relationship damage and broken channels of communication. And that it's the responsibility of members to show up for a good faith effort to try to repair that, even if the people named don't think there's a problem from their end, or that it's all the other person. I would recommend you make that commitment, because you don't want an inactive or hamstrung mediation group. Now, their job is not to decide what's right. Their job is to get flow going again, is the idea. That's the way I see it.
Okay.
So that would be something I know that I'll recommend right
Yeah.
at the outset.
Yeah. And this next question, I think, is kind of flowing with what you were just talking about. We probably need help accepting, facilitating, utilizing open disagreement.
Yeah.
Work, help us there. I think you've already said yes. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's useful to think in terms of disagreements are not always linked with significant reactivity. They can be, and those tend to be the more difficult pieces, but it's useful to think of them separately. You know, we got different ideas, but we're hearing each other okay. You know, it's productive disagreement is different than going into something and feeling threatened or, you know, dissed by the way somebody expressed themselves or whatever. And so you've got a disagreement about what to do or even what happened, on compounding what to do about the issue. And so I think it's useful to think about separating them and making room to attend first, if you can, to the relationship damage, and then returning to what do we want to do about the issue, and don't commingle them. I mean, if you try to just plow through without actually acknowledging the depth of the hurt or the fear or whatever that emotional reaction is, it's agreements. People don't hear very well. Agreements are brittle. They don't buy it. You know, I mean, they may go like, okay, all right, I'll try that, but their heart's not in it because they haven't really felt held accurately. Never mind what they think ought to happen. This is, I think it's useful to think of both elements. If they're so disagreement is going to happen some of the time without significant reactivity. That's an easier dynamic. However, sometimes people are really nervous once that surfaces because it's so easily linked with aggression or damage to relationship, and or folds into it because we don't know how to respond cooperatively. Instead, we go back to our default conditioning, being raised in a competitive culture. And so somebody disagrees with me, they're a threat. We respond with a competitive, we want to win the exchange. And now we're off to the races. And so what a lot of times I think people fail to understand is for community work, you need to unlearn competitive conditioning and be curious about people's different ideas rather than threatened by them. And that's not a simple, some of you have done that work, some of you maybe not. If you're like any other group.
How do you feel about establishing for us some norms for initiating repair? So I think what we're talking about is not necessarily like the workshop where you're here and you're helping us repair, but for us going onward, how do we
you need, I think, three things
repair
to really have something effective in place. And this speaks to maybe the role of the mediation group. First of all, you have to have general agreement in the community that we need to pay attention to this. This is worthwhile for the group to put resources into and time into. So we're willing to go there. That's the first thing. But that is not alone enough. You also have to have an agreement about how you will do it. So there's one or more, a menu of choices of what can people expect that looks like if they're involved in it. So they know they haven't just signed a blank check. So you've got some methodologies that you agree to, and then you need sufficient skill in the community or easily accessible in the area to facilitators who can deliver that methodology in a neutral and caring way. So all these things need to be in place, or you don't really have a good system.
Do you feel able to help us develop a capacity for sustainable change? I know that's a very general question.
It is. I mean, what comes up for me is the question of how much are people willing to look at the way their resistance gets in the way, and what's the roots of that, and how it serves them or doesn't. And I don't have a good read at this point of what the strength of that resistance.
What models or tools do you imagine using, e.g., truth and reconciliation, diversity workshop, conflict resolution?
Well, I have a way of approaching relationship repair that I've developed myself that'll look similar to some other methodologies, but it's what I'm comfortable with and had a lot of success with. So I'll bring that with me, and it's easily explained. It's not necessarily easy to access in the dynamic moment, but you'll get to see it when I'm there. It's relatively easy to lay out, and then you'll get to see me actually do it. And then you'll, the proof is in that it helped, that we turn a corner, that have things better now than when we started. People understand each other better. So if you like that, and then it's easy enough to, the model's not complicated, but actually developing the skill to work it in the dynamic moment when people are really fried or triggered and stuff is not necessarily easy. And then it's trying to get buy-in from people in the community that, we've tried people being able to set boundaries of what they're willing to engage in. That's not working. So maybe we need to try something else. And that's maybe the motivation for a commitment to. Now, this does not mean, please understand, when I say show up for a conversation, it doesn't mean you got to admit you're wrong, or that you got to change your views or your values are changed. I mean, you get to say your story. It's just that we want everybody to be interested in the other stories and the reactions of other people, because that's directly tied to the strength of the relationships, and relationships are the lifeblood of the community. Yeah. So we do it because we care about the community.
So we are near the end of our list of questions, but I want to do a little more with this last one. This list of models or tools: truth and reconciliation, diversity workshop, conflict resolution. I think we've talked a lot about conflict resolution, so I'm going to put that one off to the side. But truth and reconciliation and diversity workshop, as we've processed toward the possibility of a workshop as a community, we've done some different exercises, including kind of making a list of sort of potentially attractive topics and doing a dot storm for them. And truth and reconciliation was a very high dot getter. And if I would put that in a nutshell, I believe that people are really looking at the fact that there's such a difference of opinion about what has happened. And one of the things I heard you say early on in this interview a couple of times is that you don't focus too hard on getting people to have the same story. But my understanding of truth and reconciliation, which is kind of popular around here, is that people really would love to have a shared version of the story. So could we just talk a little bit about that for a moment, a little bit more?
Well, my approach would be believing everybody. And even though the stories are mutually incompatible, I mean, in other words, both can't be right. I mean, it's just, this happened, it didn't happen. What do you do with that? But rather than trying to dig into that and trying to lean one way or the other, I think it's better or more productive to say, your story is this happened and you acted this way and you had this response in this environment. Right? And so, okay, I believe that. That's your story. That's your truth. Okay. But the truth is not an objective, even knowable for sure, oh, you're right. And this other person's got a distorted view. I don't find that examination. I mean, you may need that in a judicial system, but not in a community context. You say, okay, you agree on this part and you agree we want to move forward in this way with this kind of dynamic. and that part of the time we're going to run into stories not lining up. And so I just try to get, let me see if I get your story, kind of thing. And I want you to feel that the group has gotten your story and that your actions made sense, both your reactions and how you responded hang together based on what your story is. That may or may not have been a good choice, but you can understand how it happened. And it's like, okay, now where do we want to go from here, kind of thing. This is that's the approach I use, rather than let's now take a vote on who thinks this. I mean, I just find that divisive and unhelpful.
Another follow-up to this same question, diversity training was another very high dot getter in our exercise. And I wonder if you have thoughts for us about that. You
Yeah,
openly stated earlier, I'm an old white guy.
I'm aware of that.
Have you done work with people around diversity? How do you handle it? Do you have any suggestions for us if we work with you? How do we satisfy that dimension of what's being asked for?
Well, what I'd like to do is expand your sense of how, somebody may feel like there's a commitment at the community level to being even-handed and open to people who are different at a fundamental level, and not experiencing that that's actually true. Okay, that the lip service, but they're not seeing it, and people are blind to the ways in which they're closed-minded or slant things to a way that's more comfortable for them. Okay, which wouldn't make you very different from a lot of other groups. But one of the ways I've approached this is by spending some time, depending on where we are and where this is, it's useful in my mind. It's like, no matter where you are, you have already got diversity in your group. Maybe not along the lines that you're particularly interested in, not enough people with diverse sexual orientation, say, or enough people of color, which that's a fine goal. I'm just saying there's other kinds of diversity. I mentioned some of this earlier, and it's all, you've got diversity already in your group. I mean, we make the mistake often of in communities say, well, we agree on the values together, or at least this set of words, even though we may not actually see those words the same way, but we're therefore everybody's like me. And it's like, no, they're not. They're not. Everybody's not like you. And so we need to, I think one of the primary challenges of cooperative group living is, how do you accurately see the way in which other people in the group are not the same as you, and that's okay. Simple enough sentence to say, but I mean, there's a lot we can do to unpack. Let's never mind where you would like to be. Let's talk about where you are right now, and how you've got diversity in the room, and what are you doing to hold people in an even-handed way, or recognizing them, or making it easy for them to have, let's say, an equally available on-ramp to the conversation about whatever issues the group needs to deal with. I think that's the goal. And not everybody's interested in every topic, but if they are, can everybody get their word in? I mean, is it safe, and are they welcome in the way they want to talk, in the way they want to engage? And probably there's all kinds of things that you are unintentionally doing to slant things in a certain direction because it's more comfortable for you. Whether that's because you're white or not is another layer in there, but it's a diversity issue as far as I'm concerned, and we can do a lot with that if you want.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so second to last question. We are curious about how your methods might assure that we process and use what you present rather than just receiving it.
Well, this is where I think it can really help for me to spend some focused time with your facilitators, and perhaps with your mediation guild as well. I'm not sure I'm using the right terms, but you understand Abraham's group, to talk about, what are you doing? Where is it being difficult? What could you do differently? I think it makes some sense to spend time with both of those groups to hear from you where you struggle. Rather than just a shotgun approach, and then try to do some targeted help for them. And this would also speak to multiple sessions rather than just one whirlwind weekend. where you practice some things, and then we can say, well, I thought I understood when you said it, and then I tried it and it didn't work. So obviously I didn't really get it all, or it doesn't make sense to me in the same way. So they'll be more likely to actually ground shift if I get a chance over time to see you more than once. But there's limitations of time and money. I understand that.
Okay. Well, speaking of money, last question. Now that we have heard all of the amazing ways in which you could be helpful to us, what are your current costs, and could you tie those with sort of the spectrum of things we've been talking about, including these potential Zoom interviews, a weekend, possible follow-up sessions?
I rate myself and as worth $1,500 a day. That's an 8-hour day. And I will track my time spent where I'm only working on Sunward stuff, meaning that would include the interviews. It wouldn't include travel time, but where I'm working on your group and or delivering a meeting and stuff. So I would just keep track of the time. Now, I want you to take seriously that this is a skill. And so I don't offer discounts, but I don't want money to stand in the way of, if you think I'm the right guy, I don't want you to pick somebody else because they're cheaper and you don't have the money. So I will work for what you put on the table, but and I don't have to be part of those conversations. Your finances and what this means to you and whatever. But I want you to look at it from the standpoint of, I'm worth this, but I'll do it for whatever you put on the table. Does that make sense?
Yeah, got it. Okay, so that is all the questions that our working group prepared. So I think we're basically done. I'm going to briefly invite the members of the Thriving in Harmony and Dissonance Committee, Katie, Andrea, Abraham, Harriet, to think up with anything you feel like it's just jumping out at you that I missed.
I'm good. Sorry, I'm very busy taking notes. There's been a lot to write down. So, but I think it's been great. Thank you.
Laird, thank you so much for your time, and it's incredibly nice to see you.
Right.
To all the Sun folk who took time off on a Sunday afternoon to show ourselves how important this work that we're doing is.
I'm getting it.
Going to get there one way or another.
Right.
Okay, I wish everybody a beautiful May afternoon. Oh no, June.
Brand June. Do you have a timetable for when you're going to make a decision about who you're going to work with?
That we were just talking about that as a committee recently. I think one thing that we want to ask our candidate facilitators is to please bear with us. It's community, and it can be, a little bit, like, it can take more time than we hoped it would. I hope within a month or two. We'll see.
I'm generally, I book things on a first come first served basis, and I have a fair amount of openness. So I don't think, as long as you're not like, okay, it's got to be this weekend, then I'm sure we can work it out.
The pot has been simmering for 2 or more years.
Right.
It's okay, Laird, if you are not available on our first choice weekend.
All right. Okay. All right.
All right. I bid you all farewell.
Okay. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.